Perhaps no C-level position has undergone such enormous change in the last 10 years as the Chief Information Officer position. Their job is no longer simply supporting the business and controlling the technology. These days, the CIO must drive business innovation, deliver business value while managing and improving existing technology. Now, please join me in welcoming Kail, CTO at Everest, ex-CIO at Netflix, Yousuf, CIO at Moveworks, and our moderator Mayank, founding CEO at Pause Q&A.
So, hey everyone, my name's Mayank. Thank you for the introduction, and thanks again for hanging out and learning more. I'm really honored to have both Mike and Yousuf here today. So, Yousuf is currently the CIO and VP of Customer Success at Moveworks, which is one of the fastest growing companies doing a lot of great work in AI and support and how that transforms the world of support going forward. And has been a seasoned executive, experienced executive, you said?
Yeah, I think experienced is tried and tested, seasoned is just old and boring. So,
okay.
Seasoned?
Yeah.
So seasoned and experienced. Okay, great, thanks very much.
Yeah, and then Mike is the seasoned executive.
Since I'm the oldest one here, yes.
He's had an amazing career as well. Currently the CTO at Everest and has been a technology executive at both Yahoo and Netflix very recently as well. So thank you for both being here. Really appreciate it. So based on, and I'm Mayank, I'm the CEO and founder at Pulse. And Pulse is essentially Quora for C-suite executives, starting with CIOs. It's almost like a Q&A community that we run for C-suite executives. But I had a few questions coming in based on both you guys been really good, had really good careers both as executives in larger companies and now at younger companies. Let's talk about first your journey in larger companies and what made you guys successful and sort of rise above the ranks more than any of your peers.
I could start if that's okay. I'll try and keep it, there's a lot to unpack there. Part of it may go down a group therapy route, so I don't want to basically do that on a Saturday afternoon. One of the things that I've got to do as in my career is I've always been the very first CIO of a company. And I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, candidly speaking. I just know it is a thing. So I was the first CIO for Moveworks. Right now, Moveworks has built out an AI platform which resolves IT support tickets using machine learning and natural language understanding. So if you ever want to build a career in machine learning, you should definitely speak to me afterwards. Prior to that, I was first CIO for a company called Pure Storage. I joined them when it was several hundred employees. I left when it was about 3,000 employees. And before that, I was first CIO of Qualys. So I've always been and I've always learned over time. So I think one of the common threads, at least from my career standpoint, is that I've always tried to figure out and taken a step back to do a little bit of introspection, figure out how I get better over time. And a large part of that is being able to build not just your functional playbook about as being a CIO, but also figuring out what your own playbook looks like. And so I think one of the common threads is, self-awareness is a skill that people need to develop. And I've had to develop that over monumental success and a monumental failure. And as a result of that, I've tried to basically apply that every time I've taken on a role to figure out how I can get better. So that's been kind of the common thread that I would kind of give from my standpoint.
Cool. Mike?
So I think a lot of people hear the glamorous stories of the climbing the career ladder, or the corporate ladder, career progression. Mine was very frenetic, let's say. So I started out at a computer science degree from Iowa State way back when, started as a computer programmer, moved into Unix sysadministration, or I like to say DevOps, before that was a cool buzzword. And then when I was in my 30s, I realized that I'm going to wake up someday and be 50, which I am now, and I'm still going to be on call 24/7, which is not sustainable, especially if you want to have a family or any sort of life. So then I said, okay, what are the skills I need to start working on? And for me, given my technical background, it was like more business skills and strategy and understanding that. And so hanging out with the right people or mentors to build that muscle, and then starting, as like Yousuf said, starting to build your own brand. Like Twitter was just starting, so I joined Twitter like early on and just started tweeting random stuff, whether it's technical or joking, and happened to build a decent following and got some attention there, because At some stage also, you're not going to get career opportunities from sending your resume in or being on LinkedIn. It comes through a network and getting recommended. And I think there's also 1 or 2 times in your career that you get lucky. Like, you have to take advantage of the opportunity. And luckily I did. And I was close to making a different decision, in which my career would have been a whole different, different journey. So I think that goes tying back and closing us out. It's about self-awareness and understanding situations and having a high degree of EQ.
Yeah, makes sense. So you guys both took a jump from really well-paying jobs into younger companies with a lot more risk and a lot more potential as well. But when did you know you were ready? What was the sort of career goals you'd either attained or wanted to attain, or what was the mental state that you jumped in with?
Well, before I go about my mental state, let me just ask, how many people actually want to work at a startup? Or okay, that's good. Great, that's really good. So the reason I asked that question is because my adjustment was a little bit different, because I've always worked for sizable companies. I mean, I started, when my first job in tech, in fact, was 2 decades ago, and I was I worked as the assistant to a CTO. And I was like, the company had just closed a round of funding. I was still in college at the time, and they were like, hey, by the way, we're looking for a temp to move boxes. And I was like, I can do that, totally fine. Like that would be great. And then, but the key thing was working for a company which had just received funding. It was very interesting, and something that stuck with me about being able to create a product or a company and a team, and being able to take that further forward. And it always stuck with me. And so I never really had the opportunity to work at a startup until I moved here. So I apologize for the accent. I'm British. I'm not apologizing for being British. I'm just apologizing for the accent. Although most people who are British actually apologize for being British, but that's a whole different ballgame. So one of the key things that I basically thought about was, this is the perfect geography to work in a startup, number one. Europe is kind of getting there. The ecosystem is still being developed, so I didn't have that exposure as much as the opportunity there. But one of the things that I basically learned here was you're able to basically make decisions, and you've got to actually figure out what motivates you, like what are you looking for? So don't look at it from like, oh, that's like a really interesting startup or really interesting company. Think about it, just forget the economics for just a second. If you are deeply passionate about what you do and where you work, I guarantee it to you, success will follow. Like that's just a given. Simply because you don't look at it as work, you just say, I'm just driving to be able to do better, I wanted to put my best work today. And so I had basically been a buyer of technology for the last several years. I've worked with a ton of startups as the early stage guy, as like the customer number one or the design partner, and I used to give feedback to a bunch of people. And so Moveworks was one of those companies. I was the very first customer of the company, so I knew the product worked. That's one. I liked the approach that they were going, and I understood the market. And so I said, then the question was, where do you add most value? So the biggest advice I would give anyone is go where you're most needed. And in my case, I looked at an opportunity like Moveworks where I was like, I'm going to learn how to build a company. I'm going to be in the industry of AI, which is definitively something that I'm very excited about. And if you're not intellectually curious about something, don't do it. Honestly, it's not worth it. Like getting a paycheck or otherwise, that's great. But if you're not like curious about it, then probably don't do it. And the third piece is like go where you're needed, where you know you're going to be adding value. That you're coming to work and I think the other thing that was I wanted to go out of my comfort zone. I've been a CIO first, so I have two big roles. One is to run internal operations and to run customer success. And so that's a little bit out of my comfort zone, and sometimes that's a healthy thing to do. Sometimes you need to look over the edge to know where the edge is. You don't need to jump necessarily, but you do need to basically figure that out. And I think that was part of my thought process, how I basically went to that journey. So
I think for me, it was about, I like to be able to go home each night and quantify what I did that day. And at a big company, you're in meetings, you're not moving the needle, or you can't tell exactly what you did day after day. And like it felt like I was just phoning it home, where as a startup, you do multiple things per day, and it's about driving initiatives and creating value and being, as you said, invigorated by that. For those of you who raised the hand about joining a startup, I suggest you read The Hard Thing About Hard Things from Ben Horowitz. And if that excites you, then you should pursue it. If that scares you, you probably want to reconsider. And if you're married, talk to or have a significant other, you should also be on the same page with them, whether it's financially or the number of hours you're going to work or your mental state, which can be have some wild swings, both in the enterprise and startup, but probably more with startups.
I think one thing I would basically, I think you would probably agree with this, is in a startup, you start asking, if you come from a big company or you've a sizable company, established or otherwise, there the question you can ask is like, who's taking this action? And like, hey, who's going to get this done? And when you're at a startup, when you ask that question, the answer is typically you. So you find yourself like talking to yourself. You're like, oh, I wonder who's going to get onto this. And you're like, oh, that's me. Oh yeah, I should get onto that. You don't say somebody should get onto that. You're like, I better get moving on that. And actually, that's kind of exciting, to be honest. So being able to get things done, to Mike's point about being able to quantify and feel that you're moving things further forward, that's a good measure from a startup standpoint.
Yeah. So we hire a ton of people into Pulse as well. We have a grand total of 9 people, but we do a ton of interviews at least. And as part of the growth, what we've seen is...
You have 9 people? How do you do what you do then? Why are you still happy? I don't understand this.
I have 8 really good people.
You're twice the size of my company.
Oh, that's good. That's
exactly.
Fine. Okay.
But one of the challenges is, when do you jump into a startup, right? So for you guys, timing, after you've had, at least from my point of view, and probably a lot of others, a very successful career.
Yeah.
How much of a difference did that make versus sort of jumping into it right away, given the stage that the current audience is in as well?
I've been pretty verbose, so Mike, I'm going to let you go first.
So I don't think you join a startup when you're at some stage of your career. I think it's more of where you're at the stage of your life and what, once again, invigorates and excites you. Like whether you're just out of college and want to do it, or you're my age and want to do it, like it doesn't really matter. It's whether you and those around you are prepared to do it. I think no one can time like, oh, this is the perfect time to join a startup or found a startup. I think only you can answer that question, but you have to be very, very honest with yourself. I think everybody hears the glamour stories of startups that get acquired for billions of dollars and everybody makes money. In reality, that's very, very unlikely.
Yeah, so I think one thing I would say is the number of startups that don't work out are sometimes underreported. But that used to be the case. I think now what we're basically seeing is there's just a lot more momentum because the ability to be able to execute and build out a product has become a lot easier and a lot faster. And the cost of capital and the cost of the ability to be able to do that is a lot lower. So there's a couple of ways to look at a startup. One is to think about it from your vantage point. Like, there's a bunch of owners in this room, and there's a bunch of people who will probably think about a company and say, heard this weird guy in a sweater vest on a Saturday afternoon. Like, I don't care what he says. I'm going to basically build my own thing, and that's great. The second way to look at a startup is to be able to say, do you think you're going to be able to make an impact there, and do you think there's alignment between you and the rest of the team? Because with a startup, when Moveworks when I first met, there were like 4 or 5 people. Like the whole company was in a little bit of a conference room, right? And you have to figure out that everybody's like, there's no hiding. Yeah. There's no process. It's like you just have to execute stuff, right? And so one of the things about startups is about timing as well. Like you have to come in with eyes open, knowing that one of 2 things. One is that there's a lot of work involved. Like that's a given. There should be no illusions about that. Because startups are hard, but they're also very rewarding. And the second thing is that you can definitively see that you can see your role developing and you're going to be excited about it. And if you have doubt about that, you should then start to speak. And like I give a shout out to a lot of my VC friends and Upon Capital are here. And I think you should understand how investors think about startups and how they think about market opportunities. So do your due diligence. But part of it is also about working with a team of people that are inspiring you or building a company that inspires you. And then everything else, it will come over time. So.
And one other point, just on the financial stock option comment that I made, I can't tell you how many sophisticated, really smart engineers I've interviewed that don't understand stock options or RSU grants and percentage ownership. So if you're joining a startup, understand what that number of option grant means in the overall float or shares issued. Because just because you get 1 million options doesn't mean that it's 1 million times some arbitrary number. Like they could have 100 million shares issued. So do a bunch of research before that and fully understand what that equity package is composed of.
Yeah, I mean, I would say valuations and success needs to be earned, and all of that, like that's great what you basically get, but think about the fact that you are like if you're not working, then you're literally not helping yourself. Like you're creating the value. That's how much in control you have. So that's one of the attractive pieces. Like the fact that you know you're building something, that's what excites me. Yeah. Like I know that I hire someone, I've added to it, I've made another customer successful, I've made the company a little bit more efficient, I'm adding value as a result of it. That should increase in the longer term the value of the company and the output that I'm providing. So,
yeah. All right, we'll move to audience questions. So, any questions for either Mike or Yousuf?
Some of you may have real concerns about startups. Feel free to answer those as well. We'll be very open and transparent. There it is. There are concerns. I told you they would be. Okay. Right there? So.
Hi. So talking about the startups and how easy it is to fail,
Yes.
how do you overcome failure? Like I know it's way more difficult to become successful
Yeah.
than to have a failure. So how do you overcome it? Like if you have ever had
Very,
failure.
very good question. So the question is really about failure and how you think about that. So I'm a walking, talking work in progress. That's it. That's like, I don't really have a glamorous career except to know that I'm trying to basically get better every time I move forward, especially at a startup. When you think about failure, think of it as a possibility, but not the end result. So part of this is a mental, but I mean, this is really, look, there are 15,000 companies which have been funded over the last couple of years at different levels, and some of them are going to be successful, and some of them are going to like stay around, and some of them are not, and that's totally fine. But I think the objective that you have to understand is, at least from my standpoint, is can you try and take this all the way? Like sometimes you have to look at failure as that is its possibility, but you just find that there's going to be slight bumps in the road, but you have to look at it as you're going to go all the way. So for me, my advice to you is more from a mental standpoint about the mental toughness that you need to go through and build yourself towards. Startups are going to not just fail, they're going to have difficulty. That's fine. It's about how you deal with that difficulty and how you're prepared for it, and how being open and honest about it. That's the other piece that I would basically say.
I think the other thing is you need to take a very honest assessment of why it failed and use that to build resiliency. Yeah. So that will help you in your career, for your next startup, or even in the enterprise. Yeah. So I think you can't think of it as failure being binary. It's like, how do you get stronger from that and make sure you take learnings away from it and don't repeat those again.
Yeah. It shouldn't be celebrated as much as it's something, it should be appreciated and respected. That's the key thing. And that's a very big difference in this industry, in tech and Silicon Valley, in the venture business and the startup business, that you basically respect people who have said, I would like to try and build a business to break and make a dent in the industry. That's just both, you have a ton of respect for that, and it also basically means that you may have learned a bunch of lessons, and that basically means you're going to do it better next time around. There's a lot of people who've made a tremendous amount of money, they've built great, great companies. It wasn't their first company. Very, very few people have done well with their very first company. Most of the companies, go check around, you'll find out that actually it's not their first company. It's actually their second or third company that they've actually done it. So, yes, question there. Yeah, you can shout, I can repeat it. That's fine, totally.
I don't think the qualities differ between business and technical, and especially as a co-founder, you have to be good at both. So you need to find somebody that understands what they're great at and is self-aware enough to not try to do everything. And if I'm technical, I'm not going to do all of the business, or I'm not going to do financial modeling. I can give input. So you want to have people that have conviction about their area, want to learn more about the other areas, but also know when to back off. Whether you should know them for a long time or not, the founders of Everest I've known for 20 plus years, but I've been involved with other startups where I haven't known them. I try to think I'm a good judge of initial character, and if you have a few meetings and you gel, then you should pursue it. If there's like something that annoys you, that only gets worse. It never gets better. And that's just a fact of life, unfortunately.
Basically, I tell you that one thing is personal chemistry is very important. So look, there's product alignment and strategy and all the things that you want to be able to do there. But if you can't really go to lunch with them, there's some just fundamental things. Like just think about it from like, hey, by the way, I need to work with this person for the next 4 years. So there has to be a human aspect to it. Yes, there's going to be data that you need to think about, like, can we do this? Can we build a product? What skills they have, et cetera. But part of it is like, if you need to iterate, there's a bunch of companies, by the way, who pivoted mid-stance. That happens. And so you've actually got to think of it from multiple data areas. And part of it needs to basically be, who's a good partner where you're complementing each other to be able to do super well.
I think the two foundational pillars are trust and respect.
Yeah.
And if you lose one of those, then it's nothing good happens.
Yep. We got a massive time's up signal. Can we take one more question? Or
Yes, one last question.
one last question,
Okay.
great.
Yes.
Beer?
Okay. Oh, that's
wine?
sorry.
Wine?
Oh, no wine. Ginger ale.
Ginger ale.
Dr. Pepper is totally good. Wine and whiskey on this side. No, in all seriousness, one of the things I will say is most CIOs, unfortunately, are sometimes not approachable. If schedules and all the other stuff that go with that. I'm the weirdo in the Bay Area for many reasons, but I'm very approachable, so I'm happy to do that. That's one aspect. I would basically say that one thing about CIOs is they work very closely with their direct reports. So it's not as much about basically always going to a CIO, depending on what product it is, especially if it's enterprise software. CIOs make buying decisions by working with their direct reports, VPs and directors otherwise. So always trying to figure out a champion in that company that you're basically looking to sell to. If you're looking to basically sell to the CIO networks that exist are very, very prevalent. One that I really recommend is Pulse. Honestly, it's the best. It's amazing. Verified profiles, super engaging, great user interface. And I'm being that serious. There are specific channels for CIOs and CIO communities that you basically go with. My goal that I would set for you is to say, how do I speak to 10 CIOs through the people that I know? And I'm one of them. So you're already one down. Now you need to figure out the other 9. Does that help? Is that a helpful answer? Okay.
So I think there's free social channels. You go on Twitter, there's a weekly CIO chat. Figure out what that CIO's initiatives are, what makes them tick. And then you can have a more personalized intro and then use your network or LinkedIn and find some close connection to them to make a warm introduction. Sending me or Yousuf a note in LinkedIn saying, hello, we have some synergies, we should talk, not gonna help, I'll be honest. You have to make a very targeted introduction that has some feeling behind it, and leveraging your network and figuring out, like I said, what makes them tick is the first way to do that.
Yeah, on the LinkedIn thing, make it specific. Don't be like, we think we've got magic here. Just look, we think we can provide value. This is how we think about it. We'd love to be able to get your feedback. If you're actually softening it up versus trying to basically do a hard sell, that would be my recommendation to you. And I do think that most of our CIO friends or otherwise, there's a lot of people who've been reasonable and a lot of people who've basically backed startups at early stages. So yeah, and
Yeah.
Pulse.
And if you go to Pulse, you'll actually see a webinar we just did, 2 days ago, on how to sell to CIOs. So go watch that.